I mentioned that we can create models for different purposes, and one of those purposes could be business development. So we have a requirement in this early stage to communicate a detailed understanding of everything in the project. We need to show owners a professional way of managing that data so that we can win the business. And we need to show how, so demonstrating in that early bid stage, how we're going to leverage that BIM in the construction phase. We really need it to be an extremely quick turnaround. We're talking in a 2-week period to be able to get something that is going to tell a great story to an owner. And we need to ensure that it's extremely cost effective as well, because they could be they certainly are non-recoverable costs, but we would like to say that spending time on this front end and demonstrating to an owner really how you're going to use that BIM for leveraged construction management is going to win many, many more projects. So just to mention there that we have an optimized solution to actually convey the best messages, the real key facts about using integrated 5D BIM as a deliverable, and the way that these are creating all of the data in a very transparent, very clear way for owners to understand. And there's a cost-effective solution that we can offer to help. One of the other purposes is, as we've seen there, is the design model. If you were just creating a model for design only, maybe we would require it for rendering. We would need it for analysis, so solar or any of the other ways that we can really use the 3D elements to get a better understanding of the design. For example, structural analysis is really very key and very mainstream now, using the 3D model. And we also need to be able to create documentation as well, 2D documents from it. We, as a design team, if we're creating a model, we have a choice of what we put in 3D and what we put in 2D. So it's incredibly flexible. And at the bottom there, we're asking the question, should we create everything in 3D? Should we come in and generate everything? And this is another misconception of some owners. It's not actually practical. It's not something that would be affordable. And certainly the software and hardware limitations that are currently with us, unfortunately, the complexity of those models would just be enormous. Some small buildings, obviously, we would have the opportunity to do that, but certainly for any of the medium to large size buildings, there'd be no way of the software or the hardware handling that information. So a few way-ups, a few different things that we need to think about as we design, as we specify what will be in a design model, for example, in this purpose. And then another purpose could be creating a construction model. And it's extremely important when we're creating construction models to look at consistency, to make sure that we have defined levels of detail and know what we're modeling and what we're not modeling, and to make sure that it's representing the way that we're really going to construct the building. So this design to build, build to design concept is extremely important, because we are generating a model that is going to be used for quantity takeoff, for example. So in the right-hand side, we see something that could be fine if an architect was creating a render of the building. But if we were going to take quantities off and use this model for generating more integrated construction management data and using that data, then we would want to see how the elements actually fit together, rather than a pretty image of how represented it could be just for visualization purposes. So it's a section through a model there. We have different options when we're rolling along this path, and even if somebody had created a model previously, we would we would like to make use of everybody's work. So model conversion seems like something that would be a good way of starting. It does often, however, require more time than the creation of the model in the first place. So I've said that it can be counterintuitive, but if you think about that as a process, even though it sounds like a good option at the start to use somebody else's model and then to rework it and just convert some parts and try and make best use of it, there's an extremely high amount of time that's required in that QA/QC process. You need to review every element and make sure that it's accurate. You need to check that all of the means and methods are accounted for and that we can generate the right quantities from the elements that have been created in order to populate those means and methods. We have to do a full 3D review and a 2D. So essentially when we're seeing what we have, we need to make sure what's in the documents, what's in the 3D model, what do we need to add, how do we need to resolve these issues, and really so much time is spent in that comparison. So and then we ask ourselves, when do we do that? When do we convert a model? Do we do it at a certain point in design? And if we convert it, will we then have to start updating that model after that point? And we probably require all of that data a lot sooner. So it's really a very time-consuming process and also prone to errors as well. And in our experience, we've got metrics to say that it's probably not the best method. So remodeling actually skips any of the comparison. You start with the 2D documents and reference them in. You're starting with 2D documents, which would be the starting point for your team on site. They still use the 2D documents day in, day out, alongside with the 3D model, but the data and certainly lots of arguments in the industry about contracts as well, and I'm sure that will be going on for a long time as to who owns and how do you make the best use of a 3D model from the contract sense. At the moment we are still contracted using 2D documents, and therefore it's a good starting point for the team as a construction team to remodel from the 2D documents, and essentially that's building the building first time in the virtual model and coming up with not just the clash problems, so not just a clash detection list of intersecting elements, it's also an opportunity to spot where missing dimensions on the drawings are, inconsistent or uncoordinated schedule data to the 2D data, and we can really do a full constructability report. So it's something that really does, if we have to remodel, it does add additional opportunities for us to review the design in a lot more detail. So as I said, there's metrics to say that this is actually less time than using a model that hasn't been designed, hasn't been created with, for in this example, construction in mind. Really important is to know what you want before you go ahead and do it. It's a simple statement, but very difficult when you're working with many teams across different companies, and essentially there's lots of different views about how that model should be put together. So all approaches that we've discussed have merit, and we definitely think that the best solution will change over time as people gain more experience. And essentially, you shouldn't expect a lot if somebody is just starting down on this route. Expecting a fresh design team to create a construction quality model is not rational. And as I mentioned here, we're trying to find out what the model is going to be used for before we're creating it. So thinking about that and answering many questions like that is the starting point for deriving the MPS. And no model there created without expert input will be fully useful. So we really need to know what the estimating team require, what the scheduling team requires in order to generate a useful model for them.